You're listening to the Utah Checkdown podcast. And now your host, Josh Furlong.
Welcome back to another edition of the Utah Checkdown podcast. I am Josh Furlong. As always, happy to be back with you for another day. We're doing this on a Tuesday since it was Memorial Day weekend. Hopefully you had a good weekend and didn't get hurt. You didn't have any problems, and you just had a fun time off from life, right? Like, that's what we want. So, just happy to be back. We're going to talk a bunch of stuff today, but this begins. What we're going to do is my 2025 schedule breakdown for the upcoming season for football. So we're going to break those down. We're going to start with 2 games each week. This will get us to Big 12 Media Days in July. So we'll go through this. That's 6 weeks of football. We'll sprinkle in some other stuff. Obviously, official visit season starts this week, as we've talked about a bunch. So we'll talk about that. There's some ongoing stuff with college football and how the makeup of the playoff system, all that kind of stuff. So we'll continue to do those types of things as well as we gear up for the 2025 season. But we're getting closer. We're still in May. June is kind of the dead period. July is even more dead. Utah sent out a tweet today that said they're entering their next phase of the year. So they're getting ready. They're starting their summer conditioning, so to speak, and we'll kind of get into that kind of stuff. So we'll jump into that. But first, let me tell you about our partners. Every possibility begins with a spark, and possibility can grow into something even better than expected. With a clear view of what matters most, your possibilities are endless. From its first flicker at the University of Utah, UFirst Credit Union has grown to meet its potential and ignites your possibilities. They've grown into Canyon View Credit Union. Same roots, new path. Welcome to Canyon View Credit Union. Check out the full details at canyonviewcu.com. All right, so before we get to the 2025 schedule breakdown, starting with the 2 teams that we've got, this week there's a few things that are going to take place. You've got the SEC meetings happening. This is where the coaches and the athletic directors, presidents, that kind of stuff, they all meet together to kind of have their annual meetings and being able to talk about the issues that their conference has. And already we're getting some fun sound bites out of some of the coaches talking about the college football playoffs that people are speculating on will be the future, whether that be Greg Sankey as the commissioner talking yesterday about their position, or some of these coaches talking about their things. You have Kalen DeBoer, who still thinks that Alabama should have been in the playoff, and if not for their difficult schedule, yada yada yada. Blue bloods being blue bloods. So it's some interesting stuff, but this is kind of where you get to learn the kind of the mindset of how these coaches, athletic directors, commissioners are thinking, especially as they're going into this pivotal time where they have to form what the 2026 playoffs will look like, right? They could stay at 12 teams. I doubt that. As I talked about last week, if you didn't get a chance to listen to it, I went in depth on this last week. So go back and listen to the last episode, and that'll go more into this. But just kind of looking at this, it's probably 14 or 16 teams that get into it. How that's made up, remains to be seen. But as I said, last week I went in depth on that. So you do have the SEC talking about that. The Big 12 will also be having their meetings this week. There should be opportunities for the media to be able to talk to them and get some insight onto what's going on. So we'll hear from Brett Yormark and some of the other coaches or other individuals involved in these meetings that will give us some insight as to kind of how they're moving forward as well. So I'll try to keep you updated with that. Like I said, I'm going to try to stick to these, once a week just with the schedule breakdowns, but there's chances that I may open it up to a second podcast each week when we have ongoing changes in the sport. So we'll keep you updated on all that stuff. And then lastly, before we get into this, this week we'll get the non-conference TV designations as well as those Friday night /special game time. So look forward to that here soon. We'll at least know the 3 non-conference schedule games, what time those will be. Utah does have the Black Friday game against Kansas to end the season, and so we'll probably get that one as well. Outside of that, the rest of them, in Big 12 play, will follow your standard 10 to 6 day window of knowing. And I know that's frustrating to some people, especially as you're trying to make plans with certain things, but that's the nature that we live in, where TV rules the sport. So we'll at least get 3 games. We'll know that here shortly. I believe it's later in the week that we'll get that, and we'll kind of go from there. So let's jump into this. So just as a reminder, we'll do this updated breakdown preview each week. So we'll have 2 teams we'll focus on. So we'll go 2 by 2 by 2. This is looking at this from the off-season perspective, right? So looking at how the team was last year, looking what they're bringing back or what they're going to be moving into this next year. During the week of the game, we'll go deeper with a potential guest that we'll bring in and talk about these a little bit deeper in terms of what it's looking like going into that week, right? So especially those first few weeks, whether that be non-conference scheduled or the first few weeks of the Big 12 play, there's still going to be some unknowns, still going to not know a ton about these teams. But obviously, as we get deeper into the season, we'll have a clear understanding. So, as I mentioned, these are all more projections, more just kind of general themes of what these teams will be, kind of what they're experiencing, and then we'll get deeper as the year goes by. So, quick look at the schedule. This is how it's going to break down for Utah. So they start on the road against UCLA on August 30th. Come home against Cal Poly, go on the road again for Wyoming to finish out the non-conference schedule, come back to play Texas Tech at West Virginia, then they have a bye, have Arizona State at home, go to BYU, have Colorado at home, have Cincinnati at home, and have a bye, and then they close out the schedule with their final 3 games of at Baylor, Kansas State at home, and then at Kansas on that Black Friday game. So this is an interesting schedule. It's ranked by Bill Conley, who does the SP Plus, kind of looking at all that stuff. He gives Utah the 55th toughest schedule. Not too difficult, right? Not as challenging. The best stretch for Utah here comes in that month of October. They essentially don't leave the state of Utah for a 6-week period. After West Virginia. So you have West Virginia on September 27th, and then you've got 2 byes, and then you have, all of your games at Rice-Eccles, or you're traveling to Provo. So you're not leaving the state for a 6-week period, right in the middle of your schedule. That could do wonders for the team, or, I don't know that it would be negative, but that obviously is a pretty kind of crazy stretch for this team. So really fascinated to see how that goes, but let's jump into it. So the 2 teams we'll focus on today is UCLA and Cal Poly, with most of the time today especially being on UCLA, since Cal Poly is an FCS school. No disrespect to them, but it is what it is, and as I get to it, this Cal Poly team isn't one that necessarily is going to cause some ruckus. So we'll jump into UCLA. So this game, as I mentioned, is on Saturday, August 30th. This is the season opener. You're going to be at the Rose Bowl Stadium, a place that is very familiar to Utah, having played the Bruins every single year of the Pac-12 tenure. They were in the South Division together until the Pac-12 split its division, not split, but combined its divisions together. Even then, Utah and UCLA played every single year. So this is 2 teams that are very familiar with each other. Last year was the only separation between these 2 teams in the sense that they didn't get to play. And so there's a lot of familiarity here. Now, with that said, there's been a ton of changes in just a year's time that make this different. So first of all, as I mentioned, this is a season opener. It's a road test for Utah, traveling to LA. It's at least a familiar venue, so it's not too much of a challenge in the sense of not understanding where you're going to be. This isn't flying to Gainesville and trying to figure out what that environment's going to be like. This is going to be very well known. Utah, there's not going to be a lot of surprises for. And so this becomes a fun venue for Utah to go. It's early enough in the year that, you probably see a lot of Utah fans traveling to this game. And, there should be a lot of support from Utah fans. So you also have two QBs that are debuting for their new teams. You have Devon Dampier at Utah, obviously moved over from New Mexico and will be the starting quarterback for the Utes. And then you have Nico Iamaleava, who is coming from Tennessee. Obviously, there was a lot of headlines over the summer / spring-ish. We're not summer. I mean, even my kids are out of school, but it's not summer. There's a lot of headlines as related to that with his departure from Tennessee. Still hasn't gotten to UCLA as of, recently because he was finishing school. So, interesting to see. We'll get into that a little bit. But these two quarterbacks really leading their programs in very similar veins of trying to bounce back from their poor seasons from the year prior. So expected to see kind of a national spotlight on this game, though I don't think this is one that, if either one of these teams was better, it would have a better viewability. But I still think this will get enough attention that people will want to pay attention to it in terms of national perspective, just to see, especially Nico, and kind of what he does, and we'll kind of see how that works. But this, we'll find out this week what that time is, but as of right now, it's still TBD. Last year's record for the Bruins was 5-7, so similar to Utah, exact same record as Utah, except for they went 3-6 in Big Ten play. They ended up finishing the season strong, winning 4 of their last 6 games. Kind of started to figure things out a little bit, but this was a team that it was very similarly to Utah, just could not kind of put things together and really struggled. And for Deshaun Foster in his first season at UCLA, it just didn't go well, right? You go from Chip Kelly, this offensive brilliant mind, to a guy that hadn't been coaching before. And that's not an indication of, his inability to coach. I think Foster can be a really good coach. I just think they were in a tough situation, transferring to the Big Ten, not having the same pieces, not having everything kind of work together, and it became a really tough growing position for the Bruins. So this is a team that is going to be looking to try to bounce back, right? I think their opportunity to bounce back in relation to Utah is going to be much more challenging than what Utah has, right? The Big Ten, they're not going to be competing against those top tier teams in the sense that they're necessarily going to steal wins away from them. This is a program that's still going to have a lot of struggles trying to be able to get past that 5-7 record. I do think UCLA will be better, and I think they could be, I don't want to call it significantly better, but I think they could, flip it at the very least to 7-5. But this is a tough conference, and they're going to have some struggles. So we'll see what happens there. The last meeting between these two teams was September 23rd, 2023, a riveting game of Utah winning 14-7 at Rice-Eccles Stadium. Super fun. The all-time record between these two programs is 9-12 for Utah. So Bruins have that. They have 12 games to Utah's 9. However, Utah has won 6 of the last 7 games against the Bruins. So this is pretty lopsided recently to Utah. You did have that one year when Utah traveled to the Rose Bowl, and Utah just could not put anything together, and the Bruins were they were simply a better team. And so that was the only situation where the Bruins have won in the last 7 games. So, whether that means anything going into this game, I don't know. There's a lot of change and turnover with these two programs that I don't know that those things really matter anymore. Contractually, I'm going to try to bring in some of these as well as much as I can. The Big 12 ones are a little bit harder because they're conference games. But for these non-con games, I can get you the contract. This one was a home-and-home series that was signed. It's a 2-year deal. So they have this game, which is starting off at the Rose Bowl, and then UCLA will travel to Utah, so Salt Lake City, on September 7th, 2030. So 5 years from now, you'll get the return. And you'll still have that kind of familiarity there, but by then they'll be so much different. I mean, quite honestly, who knows what the college landscape will look like in 2030. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes, but I don't think Utah was upset to travel to LA. I think this was a good opportunity for them, obviously with recruiting. It gets them back in a familiar location, and it works. So it's not a hard sell to be able to get a home and home here. This game, each team, whatever the visiting team is, will get $300,000. So Utah will get $300,000 from UCLA this year, and then in 2030, Utah will pay that back, $300,000 to the Bruins that year. This year, you will have Big 12 officials in LA, and then Big 10 officials in Salt Lake. So that's just kind of the contract look of that. And then lastly, you've got the preseason win projections. They have UCLA at 5.5 wins. So maybe slightly better than last year, maybe getting a bowl game at 6-6. But it's not much better given what they've got. Looking at also the preseason SP Plus stuff, they're ranked as the 51st team according to that, with the offense is 72nd and defense 37th. And a strength of schedule of 19th. So pretty tough schedule, especially in the Big Ten and all that. These SP Plus rankings at this point in the year, Bill Conley says it's based on three things: returning production, recent recruiting, and recent history, with 2/3 of the formula based on that returning production mixed with kind of like how they did last year, right? So that's kind of how he factors it in. With the transfer portal, it's becoming harder and harder to do these types of things, but he's getting closer and closer to kind of figuring out something that works. There's a lot of different stats you can put out there and view, but that's kind of a good indication of where this team likely is coming into the 2025 season. As it relates to last year, just kind of a brief recap, they were terrible in the ground game. They didn't get a lot of push in the O-line. Their running backs couldn't really do anything at all. It just was not effective. This was a team that rushed for only 86.6 yards per game, which ranked 132nd out of 134 FBS teams. So not great. They couldn't do anything there. Secondly, they couldn't score any points. They averaged 18.4 points per game. If you thought Utah struggled to score points, this offense was even worse. And I know, how frustrating it was for Utah fans to watch Utah try to score points. But, UCLA was in a much different situation. They were worse. It's closer than many would want it to be. Utah averaged 23.6 points per game. So they averaged about 5 more points per game. Even if you take out the FCS score, they still averaged 21.3. So still at least a field goal more per game. Look, this is splitting hairs here. These two teams were just not great, right? They weren't able to score. So it wasn't a great situation. Run defense was pretty decent. That was their best and most saving grace aspect of the team. They finished 6th in the country last year and was able to hold teams to 96.2 yards per game. So pretty decent that way. But outside of that run defense, there really wasn't much to praise for this UCLA team, especially with where they had been. And I get it, transitioning from the Pac-12 to the Big Ten is a drastic situation, especially in the Pac-12 where it was much more of a we'll call it a finesse game. There wasn't a ton of defense. Utah was obviously an outlier in that situation. UCLA had situations at times where they were great defensively. Most of the time they did okay, right? Like they were up top and did well. But this clearly was a fall off from those years, and that's to be expected. You have a team that is going up against some of the best programs in college football. But even then, even against teams that weren't, they just couldn't really get it done. So, that's kind of a recap of what they were last year, and not real great. I mean, the offense had a good season the last 5 years and then took a huge drop. 2023, they had an elite defense, and it really dropped last year. So just a lot of different things as it relates to kind of their move to the Big Ten, but just a transition period for the program as a whole, right? Trying to move on with a new coach, trying to move on with a different mindset and different things that way. As it relates to last year, because of how poorly they were, there was a lot of offensive personnel changes. And most of that came from Eric Bieniemy, the offensive coordinator, obviously a veteran offensive coordinator, a guy that had been talked about as being a potential candidate as a head coach in the NFL, had been on several teams as an offensive coordinator, and an experienced guy that had obviously been able to do well. For whatever reason, did not work at UCLA. So he was let go. Also, Marcus Thomas, their running backs coach, and Juan Castillo, their offensive line coach, is gone. And so they completely changed there. Coming in now, you have Tino Sansiri. He was the co-offensive coordinator at Indiana last year, where they led the program to their first 10-win season. Indiana was a hot team that a lot of people were talking about, and Sansiri was a big part of that. He's a guy that is, said to develop quarterbacks really well. You pair him with Nico Iamaleava. I'm curious to see how that goes. Obviously not going to have a ton of time before the season starts. You essentially just get the fall period and summer workout stuff, but there's not a lot of time to develop him in that system when you just haven't had them. So beyond that, you have AJ Stewart, who's the new running back coach. Previously was with Kansas as an analyst, and before that was an assistant head coach and running backs coach at Baylor. He also was at BYU a few years back, so there's some familiarity there. And then the offensive line coach is Andy Kwan. He was previously with Arkansas State as the offensive line coach. He also coached tight ends before then. And then you have some other coaches that have kind of added onto that, more position coaches. But essentially there was a ton of change and turnover in the coaching staff, to say nothing of the actual roster with the program. So you have, as part of those changes, a new philosophy, different things that way. And then in the portal, they lost 35 players. They welcomed in 30. I mean, this is one of those complete overhaul systems that you're just kind of really trying to find any way that you can fix what happened last year. So one of the outgoing transfers was Joey Aguilar. He's a quarterback that was expected to be the starter. He was coming in into the program, but when Nico decided to move to UCLA, decided to kind of complete the trade, so to speak, and decided to go be Tennessee's new QB. So really fascinated to kind of see how those two kind of compare to each other in this era, kind of how that works out. But you do lose that. You lose 3 wide receivers that were near your top. You lose, which is Jermichael Sturvey and Logan Loya. You also lose T.J. Harden, who is the leading rusher on the team. He transferred to SMU. He was also their second leading receiver. And you lose some more QBs as well. So there was a lot of change in terms of personnel that decided to leave. You bring in 4 offensive linemen to kind of help add to that offensive line that really wasn't able to get enough push. You get 3 new QBs, Nico being the top of that list, obviously. You then get his younger brother, Madden Iamaleava, from Arkansas. There's some drama there, too, where Arkansas is trying to recoup some NIL money. And then you get a quarterback from Ole Miss in Pierce Clarkson. So they've replaced the entire quarterback room. They went heavy on corners. They got 6 from the portal. Safeties, they got 4. And then on top of that, added Cal's leading rusher in Javian Thomas, who will now potentially be their leading back, to give them a little bit more consistency there. On top of that, you have Anthony Woods. You may remember that name or not, from his very short time at Utah that nobody got to see. This was the running back from Idaho that committed to Utah, was injured before he came in, and ended up not playing it down at Utah simply because of his injury, and then decided to go to the portal at the end of the season and went to UCLA. So, that'll be the first look that Utah fans get of their former player, which is kind of crazy, but it is what it is. And then you also have another former Utah player in wide receiver Mikey Matthews. This was a wide receiver that decided to transfer to Cal, and this last year he decided to transfer to UCLA. So interesting to see how that goes. But this is, there's a lot of turnover in a lot of positions here. There's not a ton of returning production. And the returning production that they do have, I would say, is relatively, I wouldn't call it inexperienced, but I don't think it's to that starter caliber level to be able to know how well they can do, right? A lot of these guys did have minutes. They did get opportunities, but it's not a lot of holdover from last year of guys that, you're looking at and saying, hey, this is the guy, right? There are, but not to the level that many other teams would. And so that's kind of what's limiting this team, right? You're bringing in a lot of new pieces. You don't have a lot of holdover from the year before, which to an extent is a good thing based on how they finished. But you don't have a lot of that consistency. And so there's just so many questions as it relates to what this UCLA team could be, simply because there's just so many moving pieces. With that said, the key pieces that I'm kind of isolating here is obviously Nico Iamaleava. He's a redshirt sophomore, threw for 2,600 yards and 19 touchdowns while throwing 5 interceptions on a 63.8% completion rate at Tennessee last year. Comes in, obviously, as a hot commodity, 5-star QB, a lot of attention placed on him. And depending on who you talk to at Tennessee, they either loved the guy and wanted him to stay, or they just felt like they weren't able to get the production out of him that they needed, right? Tennessee was obviously a playoff team, and so there was a production there, right? Like, he was able to do what he needed to, but this wasn't to the level that they felt like they needed to really maximize the offense there at Tennessee. So 2,600 yards obviously is not, the best, but it's also not terrible either. He's going to want to improve that number at UCLA if they want to be able to compete. But he was a redshirt sophomore, right? Like, it takes time. You're going to see him grow in that. Assuming that he can kind of jive with Sunsuri, there's potential that he could really be unleashed there at UCLA and do well. He added 358 rushing yards and 3 touchdowns, so still doesn't really move much out of the pocket, really stays in the pocket more. Anybody that saw Tennessee understands who he is, right? Like, I don't need to recap all that. Just the hard part with him, though, is he is joining in the summer. He had to finish school at Tennessee, wasn't really able to get into the system for spring because he went through spring with Tennessee partially, decided to hold out. Obviously, we saw what happened, and Tennessee balked, and he left. So, they kind of forced him out in a lot of ways and said, like, you're not going to be here. And depending on who you talk to at Tennessee, they love that, right? They love the fact that they stood up to a player trying to get more in NIL, and he can go elsewhere now, and they don't have to deal with that, and potentially have another quarterback that does okay. He's not the 5-star, but maybe there's potential that Joey Aguilar could be a better fit. So who knows? Curious to see how these two teams kind of rival each other in terms of their QB play. Tennessee is far better suited to be able to kind of make that jump than UCLA is, but we'll see how that goes. So, and then, as I mentioned, Javion Thomas, the leading rusher from Cal, he finished last year with 626 yards and 7 touchdowns. He's projected to be the starting running back. There's a lot to like with him in what he's able to do, and he's going to be utilized a ton to be able to jumpstart that run game. There's still questions, right? Like, there's still guys behind him that aren't as proven. There's guys there are some holdover, but it's not as proven as somebody returning that's on the program. And so there's still questions here, right? Like, he was able to produce at Cal, but does UCLA have the guys up front? Do they have the run game coordination that's going to work better to make that effective? UCLA by and large has generally been a really strong run team, and so I have to imagine they kind of get back to that. But there's no guarantee based on how things go. They do have 2 returning receivers that were inside the top 6 of the Pro Football Focus rankings, but there's just not a lot of production there. And based on the limited production that was all around and on the offense, it's hard to know what these guys can be. So not much there. The biggest star, maybe not the biggest star, but one of the best players on defense is corner Kanye Clark. He returns as a starter. He was the second highest graded player on defense last year. I think his ability to kind of stay in the system is going to be the best for UCLA, and being able to move forward with that. So I think you do have some potential there. The defense, I think, is much closer than the offense to being able to be okay. I think they can compete there. You can kind of move forward with how they finished that season. So if you're betting on any side of the ball, defense is where it's going to be on UCLA. However, based on these changes that they've made on the offense, especially with their quarterback and with the offensive line, there's potential. They did bring in 2 starters to the O-line at Kentucky and Florida State to kind of help there, but there just wasn't a ton of reps at their former school to fully understand how they'll acclimate to UCLA. And once again, you're putting a lot of stock into guys that just don't have a ton of tape, right? They don't have a lot of reps, and more importantly, they don't have a lot of reps together. So this offensive line, they should be better than last year. They've been rebuilt, but trying to get an offensive line to gel in week 1 of the season is going to be a very tall task, right? You see even Utah's offensive line where, we're talking about this offensive line as being one of the best in the country, and I guarantee you there's going to be some things where they kind of need to gel more and get into that rhythm. So, the offense may not be as effective as many want, but they could surprise, right? You can come in, week 1 games are always just so chaotic. You have no idea what's going on. And anybody can surprise, and all it takes is some upward momentum and things flip. So UCLA has a ton of questions on the offensive side of the ball. Utah has a lot of questions on the offensive side of the ball, but I think I'd give Utah the leg up there in terms of the pieces that they have, the offensive line that is returning for Utah, which is the one consistent that they've got, and then they've got a quarterback, that is moving up to a higher level, which is still going to be the question. But I think both of these programs are going to be kind of trying to figure themselves out in that first game, right? And so you've got 2 defenses that are going to have to do the bulk of the work. That's assuming that one of these offenses isn't going to click, if not both of them. So it could be a really fascinating game between these 2 teams. There's just so much unknown, and I think you've got 2 teams that really kind of resemble each other in terms of what they're trying to do this season and trying to kind of make their mark in their new conference after spending a lot of time doing well in the Pac-12. Utah obviously had a better trajectory in the Pac-12 than UCLA did as of late, but both of these programs were good and had effective play. So my biggest questions going into this is obviously based on the production, right? Is not having a lot of the holdover from the year before that just is unknown, right? You've got defense. Yeah, I said defense is probably at a better spot than what the offense is, but there's still not a ton of returning talent on the defensive side of the ball either. You've got one of the linebackers who is the only one with a decent, defensive grade according to PFF. Those numbers are going to improve. You do have Kanye Clark, like I mentioned, but for the most part, there's just not been a lot of depth in terms of production. And if your top tier guys weren't producing and your depth players weren't able to kind of crack that, it kind of shows where they can be. So really curious to see what this team can be. The questions, there's so many, right? Like there's just so many on what they can be in terms of how does this team acclimate? How does it work? What does that week 1 look like with so many of these guys trying to get into a system that they're unfamiliar with? This is not unusual to any team, right? Like we get it. The transfer portal is what it is, and you're going to get more of that. But I think when you have kind of a core foundation for the team and they have kind of this, understanding of what needs to be done, that makes it a little bit easier. When you have so many pieces coming in that there's so much change, that there's not a lot of consistency, especially with a new head coach that's trying to find his own way, right? This spells a lot of disaster, or you can get that second-year jump where the coach has figured it out. He's maybe made the right hires. You finally got the offensive personnel or the defensive personnel that you need, and things start to click. So this year, is obviously going to be huge for Foster, trying to see what his identity is at UCLA, see what kind of head coach he can be. I just think the deck is stacked against him. He may be a great coach, but I just think based on where they are in the Big Ten, this is going to be a challenge. And you get Utah on your first week. That's going to be a challenge with a defense that we have to expect is going to be pretty solid. These 2 teams obviously do really well in terms of their defense, but Utah's had a leg up last year at least. And there's been much more holdover and consistency on that side of the ball where Utah can go into the Rose Bowl and kind of push their way around and try to make the life of Nico Iamaleava, tough, right? And if he's not got that clarity or that consistency with his team, this could be a long night for him. So Really fascinating to see there. Really, it's just going to come down to what can this offense be for UCLA? Can Nico kind of be the erasure of everything? Eraser, yeah, whatever. Of everything, can he kind of lead this team to better production, or is it doomed more to fall by the wayside? Right? Is he a good enough quarterback to get them there? Can he get them to that level that he was able to kind of move the offense with Tennessee? I'd argue Tennessee's defense helped a ton there. But can he do more to step up his game? Because there's no denying he's a talented QB, right? I don't think anybody's expecting him not to be a talented QB, but can he unlock a further level at UCLA than what he had at Tennessee? We'll see. I think early on it's going to be hard to see, but there's a chance that he goes out there and torches Utah, and Utah has no idea what to do. I would be more skeptical of that. I think Utah's got the upper hand on that side of the ball. But that's not to say that things can't change. Utah has had their struggles in tackling. They've had their struggles in coverage at times. Those week one games, sometimes, there's not a lot of communication, and things that shouldn't be a problem end up being a problem. But like I said, I would put the odds more on Utah's side simply because of all that. And there's more questions as it relates to UCLA from my research than it does to Utah. But that's not to say that Utah doesn't have questions themselves. So, two teams that are really going to be, looking at each other in the mirror in some respects on how they need to kind of improve and kind of answer the questions and the own doubters and frustrations that are coming from the last year. So, really fascinating game. I think this is going to be a great opportunity for both programs. I think it's a great week one game because it can be a tough opponent. You get a good quarterback that's coming in. You've got a lot of attention on the game, maybe not to the level as some other games in years past, but at least you have some good attention. And if Utah can come out there and Devon Dampier can be the guy that Utah hopes that he can be, maybe that jumpstarts the campaign for Utah. Or this becomes another spiraling effect and Utah is once again in a world of hurt. Now, week one is not one to... there'll be a lot of people that are going to go one way or the other on how this team is going to go. But I don't think you can pull anything from week one in terms of being able to extrapolate how this team is going to be. So, fun game. Let's move on to Cal Poly, and we're not going to spend a ton of time on this one. This is an FCS program. They're going to play on Saturday, September 6th at Rice Eccles Stadium. This is the home opener for Utah. Regardless of the opponent, this is going to get people excited just simply to have football back at Rice Eccles Stadium. It'll also be the first time that Devon Dampier plays a true game at Rice Eccles Stadium. You'll get to see him in week one, but now you get the opportunity to see it, live. And that obviously can bring some excitement depending on how he plays at week one, right? If this was just too much for him, obviously Cal Poly can be a get right game in that sense, but this becomes an opportunity for fans to see their starting quarterback live. And so really fascinating opportunity there, despite it being an FCS game. I feel like I talk down on FCS games too much, and I don't mean to. I don't know that there's a lot of substantive value there other than just getting a scheduled win. Obviously, some FCS teams do upset the FBS counterparts, and they're able to, kind of get some fun buzz off of that. I just don't see a scenario where this Cal Poly team, who Utah has never played before, this is a team that's coming off a 3-8 season, 2-6 in Big Sky play. This is lower than the Weber State, and Utah has usually done really well against Weber State and Southern Utah, even in the years that those two teams have been good. There's years that Weber State has gone into their own respective playoffs, and Utah still managed to blow them out. The fact that Cal Poly is much lower than that kind of shows where it is. So not a lot to expect here in this game. They've never played each other, like I said, so this is the first meeting between these two programs. Contractually, this is just a one-game deal. There was no other game scheduled beyond this. It's just one time. Utah will pay Cal Poly $550,000 to come to Rice Eccles and be the whipping boy to Utah. So there's that. Outside of that, I'm not going to go into the nitty gritty of who came in the transfer portal, who left, that kind of stuff. I mean, like, it's just I'm not going to do it. The biggest issue here is that this team struggled on both sides of the ball. Their defense was a little bit better, and there's opportunities there for this defense at times to be able to compete with Utah. Not really, but they can maybe give them some early fits. But the reality is this team is not constructed in a way that is going to really present a lot of problems for Utah. They averaged 20.7 points per game last year, which is more than UCLA. But granted, this is an FCS. It's you're not getting a ton against a lower level of football. Weren't able to do it. Rushing only had 101 rushing yards per game, 235 passing yards. They did do a little bit better in the passing game, but not much, and finished with 336.9 yards per game, which just it's not enough. Quite honestly, their run game was second to last in all of FCS. Just not great. The best ability that they had was in pass blocking. They're 24th in the FCS in pass blocking. So, kudos to them on that. There's potential there, but there's just so many inconsistencies and inefficiencies on the offensive side of the ball that it really doesn't matter. And Utah's defense has a lot of potential to really just smother and make this team pay. Defensively, as much as I said the defense was a little bit better, they still allowed 31.3 points per game. They just gave up way too much. Allowed a ton in the rushing yards, 145 per game, 278 passing yards. So they allowed 423 yards per game. It just wasn't good enough. And as it compares to FCS opponents, they were middle of the row. 50s, 60 kind of range for a lot of this. So there's reasons that these games are scheduled. But this is one of those games where Utah shouldn't have any problem. This is a game where you're going in, and depending on how that week one went, it's either a get right game because you lost to UCLA, or it's just an opportunity to kind of tune up little things. A lot of teams see their biggest jump in progress from week 1 to week 2. I don't know how much you'll be able to see a lot of that in this week 2, but you're going to get some opportunities where this Utah team is much more connected than they were in the first week, if they weren't connected, right? And maybe, that works to their advantage. But you've got to be able to come in here, show out for your home team. You've got to come out there and get the crowd going. It's your first opportunity, and then you're back on the road again for another game. So you can't kind of look down on these games. You have to be able to respect them and be able to be focused, because I guarantee you Kyle Whittingham is not going to be looking at this game as one to kind of look down on, right? They do the full scout on it. They go through everything. They go through their film study, and it's just taking it serious. And if this is a team that truly wants to value this season as proving others wrong, you have to approach that in this game, right? And you have to be able to be ready for whatever this team gives you. You also have to avoid injury. Avoiding injury is not always that easy in any game, but you have to come out of this game healthy. Ideally, you have your starters out by halftime, right? And you kind of move forward and kind of move on to the next game. You see the depth at quarterback potentially. Who is going to be the guy that's filling in for Devon Dampier in a backup role? Is it Isaac Wilson? Is it Bird Ficklin? Who are the other guys that are coming in? What other playmakers can show out? And if Utah does this the right way, there's a real potential to kind of see the future depth and opportunities here. So not a ton to talk about. Sorry, had to yawn right there. Not a ton to talk about with FCS teams. I mean no disrespect by it, but this isn't, the North Dakotas or other teams that absolutely genuinely could beat an FBS team. So that's it for your first 2 weeks. There's a lot of potential. Utah starts the season out at 2-0. You get that opportunity to kind of get those 2 wins. But as we saw last year, winning at a undefeated record going into Big 12 play doesn't mean anything. It's based on injuries. It's based on momentum. It's based on a lot of things. And so getting these first two is important and big, but Utah has to focus and kind of stay energized and engaged to be able to make this kind of the momentum, right? You have the true potential where you go from that UCLA game where you're going to get Utah's best at that time, right? Not going to say it's going to be their best the entire season, and you would hope that it's not their best the entire season, but you're going to get them playing up to a team like UCLA. You get that first win against a Big Ten opponent, that's always something that you want to be able to put on your resume, right? Regardless of how well UCLA does that year. It still looks good. It still adds value to it. You've got to get that. The biggest worry for Utah moving forward is your next two opponents are ones that you should generally beat consistently, right? You have Cal Poly, FCS team. Then you move to Wyoming. It's real easy to just kind of get lax, right? And so we've got to see what the mentality of this team is. Is this one of those teams that's going to fight every single game, every single down, or is this one that's going to take plays off? Are they going to get comfortable with success? Are they going to do different things that don't give them that edge that they need to be able to compete and finish to the end? We'll see. And I think these two games, the Cal Poly and then moving forward to Wyoming, is going to be that big stretch. So, that's it for today's breakdown. It's a little bit easier than what we'll get the next few times. Up next will be Wyoming. Utah has a road game in Laramie. Got to finish that schedule that was there around COVID that Utah had to finish out. And then you get your Big 12 home opener, Big 12 home opener against Texas Tech, which is a very fascinating team this year. And we'll kind of see how that goes. So should be a lot of fun. Next week we'll have a lot more to talk about in terms of what there is to what there is essentially with this team, and we'll continue to break down this. And then if there's anything more that pops up based on college football and the changes there, then we'll talk about that. But I hope any of this gave you some insight into what's going on with the teams, kind of give you an idea of how UCLA and Cal Poly will be. We'll try to get that with all this. Please let me know if you have any other questions. We'll kind of jump into that. But I hope you're having a great off season, and we'll gear up for more college football soon. With that, we're signing off. Have a great day. Talk to you later.